Hi, everybody. Welcome to Groundwork. This is a podcast from the McClanahan Corporation where we talk about key material processing topics. From agriculture to mining to material recycling, we'll discuss the best ways to process the raw materials that power the world. Because if it's not grown, it is mined. I'm Pedro Freire. I'm the Business Development Manager for the McClanahan Aggregate Systems Group, and I look after the Latin American region. Today, I'll be joined by my co-worker, Patrick Rockwell.
I'm Patrick Rockwell. I'm the Integrated Systems Engineering Manager. My team works on process engineering. We design the wash systems for all kinds of different sand applications, both aggregates and industrial sands, phosphate, all kinds of different applications. We also handle some mining applications and some agricultural as well. And I've been in the industry for 15 years in March, and I've been doing the same job this whole time with just a little bit of variation here and there. Do a lot of commissioning of our systems, troubleshooting our equipment, and just working with our customers to produce as much product as they can.
So today, Patrick and I are going to explore the topic industrial sands. We're going to discuss what industrial sands is, the application that it can be used, where industrial sands can be found, the extracting and processing methods, and we're going to discuss some of the challenges and sustainability related to industrial sands. Patrick, when it comes to industrial sands, what comes to mind right away?
Well, the first industrial sands that I think of are always frac sand and glass sand and foundry sand. Those are the most common industrial sands. They're all silica sands, and we do a lot of work in all three of those areas.
The moment I hear about industrial sands, I think about the confusion a lot of people have where they confuse industrial sands with manufactured sands, because I used to confuse that as well when I first started in this industry. So when I think of industrial sands, I think about sands with high purity and sands that meet specific grain sizes and shapes, and they can obviously be used for industrial applications like glass, foundry, frac sand, filtration, etc., as opposed to manufactured sands that are any type of sand that you can make by crushing rocks. So keep that in mind. There is a difference, everybody, between industrial sands and manufactured sands. In regards to the application that they can be used, I just mentioned a couple, Patrick, you as well: glass sand, foundry sand, fracking, filtration, and a few other ones such as sport sands. We've done a lot of work with golf sands and some other types of sands. Can we explore that a little bit, Patrick, based on your experience and some of the plants that you have commissioned?
Yeah, a lot of places will find that sports sands are incredibly profitable. They demand a really high value. So baseball fields, golf courses, things like that, because of Bermuda grass and golf courses like to have a silica sand to grow in. So that's really common for people to get that sand from some of our customers, and it might not be as high a volume as sand and gravel for aggregates, but it's usually a very high profit.
So, Patrick, when it comes to filtration sands, sands that can be used for water treatment facilities, and even some of our customers in Argentina that are looking for stockpile dewatering systems, what are your thoughts on those?
Well, we do have some customers down in Argentina who are using our systems to make filtration sands. We have some here in the U.S. as well. It's not the most common application for our equipment, but it's definitely one of the many things that you can do with it.
Absolutely. Now, frac sand, we've got tons of plants operating here in the States, South America as well, doing hydraulic fracturing, obviously to capture oil and gas. You have vast experience commissioning and starting up some of those plants.
Yeah, we've been doing frac sand plants for 15 years now. We've got one in the Middle East as well, and quite a bit in the Midwest here in the U.S., and then down in Texas and Colorado. So just basically anywhere there are large sand deposits, like especially the Jordan and St. Peter's sandstone deposits there in the Midwest. those are some of the purest silica sand deposits in the world. So it's a very popular place to get glass sand, foundry sand, and frac sand.
Absolutely. And that leads me to another topic, foundry sand. I mean, foundry sand is used to create molds from sand to cast metals. You know,
Yep.
we have some casting in our shop in Hollidaysburg. So those are very common in manufacturing facilities.
Yeah, we have a few different specialty plants to do foundry sands. It's a very tight spec, and there are a few different specs for foundry sand. And we actually have kind of a modified hydrosizer slash sand tank where it's like a 5-stage sand tank that does that up in Wisconsin, and they're able to make some specialty foundry sands with that. It's pretty interesting, unique application.
Absolutely. And last but not least, glass sand. I mean, glass sand is also very similar to frac sand, tight specifications, but obviously to make glass. We have a couple customers. We recently commissioned a plant in Colombia that is making uh, glass sand for beer bottles, you know, so that's very common.
Yeah, glass sand's like a 30 mesh by 140 mesh, which is actually about the one of the most common specs now for a frac sand, even though it's not an API spec. That's a size range that's used quite a bit these days. So API spec stands for the American Petroleum Institute, which is really the worldwide standard for frac sand and any gas and oil extraction. So we have customers who are buying systems that make glass sand and frac sand in the same system, and they'll switch back and forth between the two depending on their markets. There's so many applications for industrial sands, and sometimes people don't even realize that the sand that they're selling into the aggregates industry could be sold into an industrial application, or they might be in the frac sand industry and not realize that they could be selling into foundry or glass sand. So, just you know, it's good to open up your horizons and think about what else you can do with your deposit. Applying an existing system and trying to make a different product, that's going to depend a lot on what those other products are that you're trying to make. So, and what you're making at the time. So if you've got, concrete sand that you realize is all silica, then you're probably going to need to make a lot of changes to that system to be able to make a frac sand or a glass sand or a foundry sand, because you're going to need some sharper separations in that really difficult range of 500 to 600 micron, which is 30 to 40 mesh really. And then the other thing is trying to know exactly what products are available to you and what your customers are trying to make. So a glass sand is usually that 500 to 100 micron. You can have a decent amount between 500 and 600 without issue. I think it's 0.1% retained on 800 micron, and then you can't have anything over 1 mil. The problem is that with glass sand, if you have those larger particles, they won't melt down completely. So then you've got these bad spots in a piece of glass, and it won't be completely clear. So that glass sand spec is pretty important. And the same thing on the bottom end. If you have a lot of fines, then that material will just make a mess in the furnace. So it's pretty important to have those be in those specs because those tolerances are very tight. Again, the frac sand and glass sand specs are pretty close. If you're doing that mono mesh of 30 to 140 on the frac sand side, but then the foundry sand is really specialty. So you're going to usually need to make multiple cuts in that coarse range, that really tough range of 20 mesh down to about 70 mesh. So it really just depends on what products you're trying to make. And again, we use hydrosizers for those cuts, and they do a really good job of making a sharp separation at a relatively low cost as compared with drying and dry screening, all of that.
Where are some of these industrial sands found throughout the world? I mean, when we talk about the geological origins of industrial sand, to me, the first thing that comes to mind, obviously, rivers, streams, glaciers, beaches. Can you think of anything else?
Yeah, it's a lot of ancient beaches, places where there's high silica concentrations, and we've got that all around the world. Again, the some of the purest deposits are here in the U.S. and Midwest, and that's like multi millions of years old silica sand deposit there. And then we've got ones in Texas. We've got dune sands there, which, if they're properly treated, even if it's not as high of a silica content, we can scrub that with the tertiary cells, and then we can separate out the different contaminants with flotation and with other scrubbing and washing. So, and then in Australia, there's a lot of silica sand there. I mean, it's all around the world. Argentina, Colombia, Middle East, world's covered in silica sand. So you just have different levels of washing and processing required depending on the deposit.
Yeah, so I mean, our planet is indeed a global hotspot for it. And when it comes to these global hotspots, the places I think of right away are obviously the northern states in the US, obviously India, China, Mexico, north of Mexico, Argentina, Australia. Like you said, they're everywhere. We just have to know where they are. Now, you were talking a little bit about some of the process methods for washing, classifying these industrial sands. And this leads us to the next topic, extracting and processing. So some of the mining methods in order for us to get industrial sands in spec and do what they're supposed to be doing. Let's start exploring the mining methods when it comes to processing steps, crushing, screening, washing, drying, sizing, quality control. So walk us through that, please.
So it really just depends on the deposit. Some of these silicon sand deposits are in a sandstone. So they've got to blast that sandstone. They've got to crush it and liberate all those particles before going through a process of washing and sizing. Separating the different size particles. There are other deposits that are just in the ground, and you can use an excavator or you can use a suction dredge. If you have a loose deposit like that, a suction dredge is probably the most efficient means of mining. It's quick, it's easy, and it's very, very common. But if crushing is required, then you're looking at some kind of a like a jaw crusher or something like that on the front end, and then maybe a VSI. Some people are using HSIs. That does create more fines, which isn't usually desirable, but um, that's commonly used as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because most of the applications I've been looking after don't really require crushing. So, I mean, like I said, we can source that, we can supply that, we can handle that as McClanahan as well. But most of my applications are from river streams. That sand already comes pretty pure. What we got to do is just do a primary classifying screen in order to ensure that no oversize gets into that minus 30 mesh, and everything else is the product that we use. But yeah, you're right. There's a whole bunch of different ways in order to process and mine industrial sands.
Yeah, sometimes drawings are wired, sometimes not. It just depends on the product, how tight the spec is. Um, if it's got to be a really tight spec, then you're going to have your highest efficiency screening with the dry screen. But a lot of the times that spec's a little bit looser, and you can do a wash, a wet classification instead, and that can save you a lot of money both on the equipment side and then also on the processing side as far as the cost of drying and the cost of dry screening.
I think the most important thing here to explore is quality control, because many companies, many suppliers can get out there and say that they supply equipment that can process industrial sands. But when it comes to the quality control and the actual specs and hitting those targets, that's where we differentiate from many others. Can we talk a little bit about some of those tight specs that you've seen as you spec some of these plants and how we've been able to achieve those results?
Yeah, I mean, being the head of process engineering, I feel like that's what I like to take the most pride in. My boss has been doing this since I was born 40 years ago. He's been doing industrial sand that long. So, um, in McClanahan, we've got a lot of years of experience in putting these systems together, because you can get a cyclone anywhere, you can get a dewatering screen anywhere, a pump, but it's putting
Even a
things.
sump, right, Patrick? Even a
Oh
sump.
yeah, it's just a tank, but I mean you can do that
Yeah,
wrong too, pretty
yeah, yeah,
easily. Anybody who has a sand plant's probably seen a tank get sanded, a pump get sanded out, because the
yeah.
sump wasn't designed right. But what we offer, which is pretty unique, is a high level of process design on the front end, saying what do you have in the ground and what are you going to try to make, and every deposit's different. So if you just say here's a frac sand plant in a can and that's going to make frac sand, that's it's going to be right size for some applications and wrong size for everything else. So we like to look at each application individually and say, all right, do you need scrubbing? Well, let's use attrition cells. If you don't need scrubbing, you can save a lot of money there. Or, hey, we need to make this size spec and we've got to waste a lot of oversize. If you're wasting a lot of oversize, that changes your screening on the front end quite a bit. And if you're wasting a lot of fines, then that changes your water management system. You've got to say, do we need a fines recovery system? Do we need a bigger pump on this thickener? Do we need more polymer? To settle out those fines. So looking at each application individually and then custom tailoring a system to work in those different deposits is what makes my job interesting, and why I still love my job and still interested and still seeing something new every day.
That's why that no, that's amazing. It's great, and also this is why most of these industrial sand plants that we supply, we can't say that they're standard. We may have some standard components that combined can be a solution for washing and classifying, but every plant is tailored to that specific application. You and I have worked in a frac sand plant before where the customer needed attrition cells, but then later, a couple of years later, the material changed and they realize that they don't need the attrition anymore, so we can just set up a bypass system in order to bypass those attrition cells. So these are the level of details that we look after when pre-sales and engineering are putting a plant together. We try to think outside the box and see what some of these challenges that these customers are going to face, right?
Yeah, and attrition scrubbing, a lot of the times people will say, I'd rather have that in there and have a higher level of quality coming out of my plant. But it is a decent amount of energy, and sometimes it's not required. You just need to take a look at each individual application. And yeah, more to that point, the first frac sand plant I ever started up, they had a deposit and they thought they were going to have 60% yield. So they designed the whole plant around 200 tons an hour coming in and 120 tons an hour of product. And then they got into the deposit and it was 40% yield instead of 60. So now they're down to 80 tons an hour instead of 120, and their system's not sized to get that 120. They had customers who had expectations of deliveries based on that 120. So it's really important to be able to know your deposit well and to consider building the plant around that, and then also building in some redundancies and some extra capacity, for growth, and B, just for, dig over here, you get one thing, you dig over there, it might look a little bit different. So,
Yeah, no, right on. Hit the nail on the head there. And I mean, the challenges don't stop there. Like we studied the raw material, we designed the processing solution, and then there are some challenges which lead us to the next topic here: challenges for sustainability related to processing industrial sand. So, what are some of the environmental impacts that you've seen as you start up some of these plants on site?
well, the first thing that comes to mind with sustainability is when we started up the plant in Colombia there. They're making bottles and a lot of glass with that sand plant that we made, but they're doing a ton of recycling at the same time. So they've got recycled materials coming in, and they've got raw virgin sand coming in at the same time. So they're doing a really good job of sustainability with recycling glass and using new sand at the same time. The frac sand, I know that stays in the well, so there's no reuse of that. But sometimes they're able to recover some of the sand that comes out. So everyone's trying to improve. It's in our customers' best interest to be sustainable because it just helps long term be able to have more product on the ground if you can recycle or reuse as much as possible.
Absolutely, that's spot on. And we do supply closed loop systems and solutions. We supply water treatment systems, filtration solutions that can eliminate the settling ponds. So, as equipment suppliers, we're also trying to understand the impact that it's going to have on site and try to minimize that environmental impact, as much as possible.
Yeah, the water management systems with a thickener and then a plate press to be able to take the tailings and to get a product that you can put right back into the ground or use for a secondary product potentially for any of those clays. That really helps reduce the ponds on the ground. It helps open up more deposit. Because if you have acres and acres of ponds, then you have less accessible products there. So. And then it's after the fact for like when your deposit's spent, it really helps with that handing that over to sell that land without being completely covered in ponds.
Yeah, so when it comes to sustainability solutions, we can offer these closed loop solutions that include water treatment systems, and many of our customers have been seeking for water treatment systems as an alternative because a lot of the cut points they want to make might require a lot more water or a lot less water. So, Patrick, can you touch base a little bit on that, please?
Yeah, so for an aggregate producer, you're probably used to using 3 to 5 gallons per minute per ton per hour. That's kind of like the industry standard when you're screening. You might use a little bit more water to wash, but it's not that much ultimately as compared with these industrial sands. Because with the industrial sand, we're usually going to have some kind of scrubbing more often than not, which is often going to add another rinse stage. And then for the hydrosizer cuts that are in that 500 micron to 200 micron range, or 70 mesh up to about 30 mesh, those cuts are going to use a whole lot of water because it's a hydraulic classification with a hydrosizer. We're using rising current water to float out those fine sand particles, and you just need a lot of water to float out all that sand. So we're going to use 10 to 12 gallons per minute per ton per hour instead of 3 to 5. So with all that extra water, that's got to come from somewhere. That means larger ponds. That means more fresh water coming in potentially if you're washing out a lot of fines. So if we put in a thickener, then that thickener is just going to discharge like a 35% solids underflow of mud. So you can have a much smaller pond just to handle that mud. And then if you have a press, then you don't have any discharge of mud into a pond. That would just be, cakes of clay that you can just backfill or again sell if you have an opportunity to do that. But then you're getting like 95% water recirc as compared with having to have a pond that recirculates all that water.
This pretty much sums it up. Thanks, everybody. Today we talked about industrial sands. We covered what they are, some of the applications they can be used, whether it can be found throughout the world, the extracting and mining methods, and also some of the challenges in sustainability related to industrial sands. Appreciate everybody taking the time to listen or watch this podcast. And thank you for listening to Groundwork. This is a McClanahan podcast. Please be sure to subscribe on your favorite listening app for some of our new episodes and follow McClanahan on social media for more content.
Thanks, Pedro.
Thanks, Patrick.